tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Monday, December 6, 2021. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. Yes, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts. Troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards from across the country. On Friday, Sean Kitchen and I break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And check out our Wednesday show. The Wednesday show was Cyril Michaleko. Cyril is a progressive columnist from the Bucks County Courier-Times and the Intelligencer, and he joins me every other couple weeks or so on Wednesdays to drill down into the Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and international politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can help support this show right now by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Simply head on over to patreon.com/rcpress and choose your membership level. You can join us on our Discord server. Yes, our Discord server. Information on that is in today's show notes or on our chat on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. It's our chat in YouTube or in the show description on YouTube. Check it out there. And tonight, since we've got an open phones, open comment session, if you want to call into the show, you can call in at any time. Just check out the information there on how to join through riverside.fm. The link is in the show's description in today's YouTube stream. So do check that out. For more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. Wherever you get your streams, you can find him there. And make sure you subscribe to his daily podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Check out everything that Rick's got going on over the ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. Like I've been saying, he's got a show now, WBAI in New York, KPFK in Los Angeles, just went on the air this past week in Chicago and Minneapolis. Boom! It's exploded. It's phenomenal. Check out the Rick Smith Show at thericksmithshow.com. And you have to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast if you haven't already. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house, and they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus and subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Attention all you gamers out there. You got a gamer in the house? You looking for gifts for this holiday season? Well, you got to check out The Game In. The Game In, that's with two N's. The Game In is a Quakertown-based, black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, you name it. And the kids get a discount with every A on their report card. So definitely check them out on their Facebook page. Follow them on Twitter at The Game In. If you got a question about a game, look for something that's hard to find, shoot them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. That's thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at @SongADayman. That's @SongADayman on Twitter. Well, how's everybody doing tonight? Yes, it's just me tonight. I had some possibilities that we could have swung something the last minute, but I thought, you know what, let's do it kind of, instead of a rush job, let's do it kind of right. And I had some things I was been thinking a lot about anyway, so I thought it was a good night to come on. But I do want to give you an update on some of the shows we've got coming up. I'm absolutely thrilled, actually. So if you remember a couple of weeks back, it might have been a week ago, I don't know, I'm losing track of time at this time of year. It was right after that New York Times 2-part podcast on Central Bucks School District dropped. Right. My plan was to do a little kind of a Patreon only show that would just be talking a little bit about that podcast. And I was getting ready to do that. But then I got one better. So I think instead of trying to kind of do double duty here, we're going to just do this. So I'm very thrilled that next week on this show, Out to Coop Live at 7 p.m., we're going to have Dina Lagerman will be on the show. Now, Dina, some of you already know her. Dina was a school board candidate in Central Bucks School District. She is a writer. She is a teacher. And she wrote this amazing piece on Medium. She has a kind of Medium account. It's also, you can check her out on Substack or on Substack, a Muck Rack. I'm sorry. She might have something on Substack too as well. I don't know, but she's a phenomenal writer, and she tells this story. And I think, frankly, she's got a first person's view of what this was like. And in that article she put together on Medium, and again, that the title of that article is "Central Bucks is Not Okay." Really covered some of the ground that I wanted to talk, except when I say one better is because she's got an insider's view, and she kind of felt directly the impact of what Paul Martino and this dark money, these funders actually had done. And you'll find it to be quite a different kind of story when you hear it from her perspective on the show next week. So do tune in next week. That's Out to Coop Live on December 13th at 7 p.m. And we will have Dina Lagerman on the show, talk about her article, Central Bucks is Not Okay, and so much more about what's happening in the school board. And then, as a Christmas special, if you will, on the Monday before Christmas, when all through the house, not a placard was stirring, right? No, whatever. But we're going to have a really cool show. My guest will be Christopher Rodkey. Now, some of you know, you might know him. He is a pastor at a UCC church out in kind of the York area. He's been active in politics for kind of quite some time. He's a frequent listener to the show. Sometimes you hear his comments on the show. And he just recently declared his candidacy. He's running to basically represent his district, right? The state legislature. So this is actually absolutely thrilling. Christopher Rodkey is going to come on. He's going to be we'll talk a little bit about his candidacy, but given the fact he is a UCC minister too as well, and I've loved his work on this over the years, and I've been looking for a kind of a good opportunity to have him on the show. And a couple times just things got crazy, but this is perfect. It's right before Christmas. He just launched his campaign, and we're going to talk about religion and politics, right? We're going to talk about that kind of intersection, and we're going to take a look at especially some of the kind of extremism that's going on right now. So do tune in for that. That is December 20th at 7 p.m. We'll have Christopher Rodkey, and next week on the show will be Dina Lagerman talking about her piece in Medium called Central Bucks is Not Okay, and so much more. So, yeah, so what are we doing here tonight is the question, right? Well, a few things. I also got to give a shout out to Chuck. Chuck is our most recent patron. Thank you, Chuck, for becoming a patron of Raging Chicken and help make this show kind of worth doing in some ways, in the sense that it is kind of the support of the community that makes it possible, right? Support of people like you. So thank you, Chuck, for joining, become our newest patron. You can become a patron, like I said. Anybody out there is listening to the show, you're listening to our podcast, just head on over to patreon.com/rcpress, and you can become a patron for as little as $5 a month. You're looking for a kind of a decent cause that you believe in, right? We hope you believe in us here at Raging Chicken, that you'd be willing to kind of, give us a little love this Christmas by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Okay, sorry, I just had a weird notification come up. Okay, so tonight's show, we kind of have a few things. Tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about the essential work of what we might call organizing muscular social movements in the face of a rather lackluster Democratic Party leadership. Whether we're talking about here on the at the state level, or if we're talking about at the federal level. There's some of that kind of going around depending on kind of where you're located and so on. Now, while the last few years have seen a new vitality in local electoral politics from groups like DSA, from the Women's March, PA Stands Up, and other like-minded organizations, we continue to see generational defeats in the pillars of democratic struggle. And what I mean by that? Well, look no further than last week's Supreme Court arguments, which seem to indicate that right-wing justices are ready to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's a generational defeat. Goes on. Or consider the monumental anti-labor Supreme Court decision in the Janus case that stripped away the union's ability to collect what's called fair share dues, fair share fees, while requiring those same unions to service all those workers who are not members. Again, this is one of the things that was a little bit kind of obscure for folks who might not be in a union, right? Who are not aware of a union, or not aware of all the kind of particulars of a union. And, you say fair share, you don't know kind of what this means, or you call agency fees, seems even more obscure. All basically that means, you think about it like this. So if you get a union contract in a shop, right, whether it's like my place, like it's a higher education, whether you're talking about a teacher at a school, whether you're talking about someone who's a steel worker, whether you're talking about somebody who, is in the game industry, like, doesn't matter what industry it is, whatever it is, when you get a union contract, that contract covers all workers, right? So not just the workers who become members of the union, but all workers. Right. And so you are the sole kind of arbiter, right? It's one of the kind of key things that gets negotiated in the contract, right? Is that when you're looking at wages, hours, and working conditions, that goes through the contract, and the union is the one who negotiates those contracts. So even if, say, for example, even if you hate unions and you work at that particular place, you still get the benefits, you'll still get the health care, you guaranteed your raises, right? Doesn't help you whether you're for or against the union, right, when it comes to that contract, right? Now, we've seen attacks from the right wing kind of against that for a long time, and you see this through these kind of right-to-work states where, where nobody needs to be a member of the union, whatever it might be. But then you also have this idea that, if you're not a member of the union, right, and so that you don't pay union dues, right? However, since you also benefit from that contract, right, it had been established law for ages and ages, right, that, the union can still charge you what's called an agency fee. That is, the amount of kind of the cost that basically it takes that invested into your grievance procedures to make sure that you have somebody who's negotiating your contract, right? All that kind of goes into ensuring that you have a contract and defending those rights of your contract. You have to kind of kick in, right? It's kind of like a no free rider clause, right? Well, in the Janus decision, basically it said like, well, welcome free riders, right? Is that, yes, those people, they don't want to be a member of the union. They don't have to pay the union anything. They still get all the benefits of the union. The union still has to defend them. The union still has to negotiate their contract. The union still has to step up and handle their grievance cases, right? But they don't have to pay anything for it, so they get it all for free, right? That was kind of part of what we saw in the Janus case. Anyways, so we saw that. And we also saw Citizens United, right, which kind of granted free speech rights to corporations and allowed corporations and unions, for that matter, but corporations are where the big bucks is, they could contribute unlimited funds to political campaigns because now they're people, right? And we want to kind of deal with their, violate the corporations' free speech rights because corporations are individuals, right? Pretty crazy. So anyways, so all this is taking place against a backdrop of growing extremism in our communities, right? We've talked a lot about this on our show. The resurgence of white supremacist organizations, radical right-wing conspiracists infecting our school boards, and extremists, putting our communities at risk by refusing common sense COVID protocols, or for that matter, common sense gun laws that we saw once again tragically this past week. So, I thought a little bit about, been thinking about these issues a lot again, and thinking about some things I've been reading of late, and I thought I'd share some of that with you tonight. So if you listen to our show on Friday, I talked a little bit about Rebecca Traister's recent article, The Betrayal of Roe. And I was also been kind of listening to the audiobook of Jane McAlevy's A Collective Bargain, Unions Organizing in the Fight for Democracy. And kind of thinking about all these things together, right? Thinking about what Jane McAlevey was arguing, thinking about what Rebecca Traister was kind of laying out in her critique. Also thinking about some of the things that Naomi Klein has been talked about kind of years ago. And that's why, I was talking about muscular organizing in our title tonight, in part because in her book, This Changes Everything, kind of about climate change and stuff, she uses that language of muscular social movements. And whether or not I had heard that phrase before, I remember it sticking out to me at the time. And kind of wasn't quite sure how I felt about the word muscular social movements, but the more and more I think about it, the more it makes sense. Like, so, she was basically saying, it's a muscular social movement. And if you don't exercise those muscles, that, those muscles will atrophy, right? And using that kind of metaphor. And then, if you remember, Laura Putnam was on the show a few weeks back, and we were talking a lot about kind of democracy and kind of building organizations and organizing around and organizing again. And she talked about you need to practice democracy, right? You need to exercise your democratic muscles, right? And that you have to build up those muscles in order to kind of act them. So she was using the same kind of language. And of course, Jane McAlevey also uses the same kind of language. She was talking about kind of union organizing and the kind of the connections between unions and the defense of democracy and the kind of future of our republic. So I was putting all these things together. And I've also thinking a lot about what kind of brought this front and center to me more than anything else lately is this frustration with I don't know what exactly to call it, but kind of let's call it kind of like moralistic discourse or political discourse that's kind of ethically based. And I hate to say it like that because it's not like what I'm talking about is not ethical, but what I'm talking about is this certain kind of moralism as politics. Right, by the kind of upstandedness as politics, our ability to be able to reference common practices of things like decency, right, of civility, and this other thing as having a force in the world, right? So it's that idea when somebody is kind of like misbehaves, right, and you point them out, and you're going, oh, I can't believe you did that. And they hang their head in shame and they apologize. I'm so sorry, right? That kind of nonsense. Not kind of nonsense, that kind of process. And as long as people are buying into that moral code, if you will, right? That has some leverage, right? I mean, as someone who grew up Catholic, shame has leverage, right? It causes people to do things, right? When it's kind of deployed in that way, because that shame only has effect because it's being measured against a kind of a moral kind of discursive background that subjects, individuals, right, embody, right, and they kind of believe, right, and act upon. But as we've been talking about on the show for years, really, is that we've seen this breakaway where you have one side of the political spectrum, the Democrats, are still embedded in things like institutions and the sanctity of institutions and these codes of kind of, I don't know, civility, if you will, a certain kind of moralism as a way of guiding our society forward and all that kind of stuff. Where the other side, right, Republicans have increasingly become, yes, they use the language of morality and religion and all this other kind of stuff, but they're not bothered by shame. I mean, Donald Trump is only the kind of, he's kind of like, the giant, some come around with a giant red kind of magic marker to kind of dot the I and slash the T, right? Basically, this is what we've been talking about. Go, Donald. That idea where, people could call out his behavior left and right, and he didn't care, right? And even when you say, oh my God, he has no shame, doesn't matter, right? Because if they have no shame, then saying you have no shame has no effect, right? So anyways, so I was thinking about that, and then thinking about what happened in the wake of the Supreme Court hearings, particularly the Mississippi case, where they seem to be positioning themselves to strike down Roe. You had a lot of people coming out and talking about the legitimacy of the court, right? I mean, famously, and I'm pulling this from an article from the New York Times this past weekend by Adam Liptak, where he was quoting, people I'm sure are already familiar with this, but what Justice Sonia Sotomayor said, will this institution survive the stench that this creates in the public perception that the Constitution and its reading are just political acts? She asked. And then the article also says, if Supreme Court is perceived to be made up of politicians rather than judges, Justice Stephen Breyer said, quote, that's what kills us as an American institution, right? And the article goes on to talk about, these kind of questions of legitimacy and what gives the court legitimacy and all this kind of stuff. And there does seem to be a kind of a falling of legitimacy. So it's not just something that people are making up. Like, so for example, the same article quotes a Quinnipiac University poll from last month that found that 61% of Americans said that the Supreme Court was mainly motivated by politics, while 32% said it was mainly motivated by the law. Okay, what do those numbers mean? Well, you put it to 3 years previous. 3 years ago, corresponding numbers were 50 believe that it was motivated by politics, where 42% believe that it was mainly motivated by the law. Right? You still had a majority, well, narrowly majority, 50%, not the 50% plus one, but 50%, half Americans believe that it was motivated by politics. That's still pretty high. But those ones who thought it was motivated by the law was still with the 42%. So it's kind of, in the area of kind of a closer split. And you see those numbers pull apart. And so the question is, what does this matter, right? I mean, and when I start seeing a lot of coverage in the news media about the concern over, or the expressed concern over the legitimacy of the court being put forth by Sonia Sotomayor and Stephen Breyer and so on, I do believe that they're concerned about that. I just don't think that's the political game we're playing anymore. And just so happens, Talia Lavin, I don't know if you know her. She's phenomenal. She's done great work on the kind of extreme right, and she's got this great blog, or this great newsletter that's called The Sword and the Sandwich. Literally, it's a freaking awesome thing. She had this piece that I read her last few days ago. It came out. It was on barbecue. Right. But it was actually going to the history of barbecue and slavery and kind of indigenous food processes and what these barbecues kind of how they're all embedded with questions of race and colonialism. It was just absolutely fascinating. Right. So it's this mix, and she has these sandwiches and politics and things like this. But the one that came out today was called Abortion, Hypocrisy, and the Will to Power. It had no sandwiches in it. And it got to, again, another gloss at what I was talking about earlier. So let me just read you a little bit of her piece from today. She said, "The principal lens through which I observe the American right is this. What looks like hypocrisy from the outside can be explained by the pure will to power. At the moment, in the national political landscape, there is ample evidence that the Republican Party and its far-right fellow travelers seek absolute power at all costs. The barest of glances at recent headlines reifies the principle. The comical, tortured gerrymandering in red and purple states, functionally creating a firewall against majority rule, the wholesale erosion of voting rights, the continual insistence central to party orthodoxy that the last presidential election was a fraud, and the exiled and florid would-be king of America is right in his proxy fantasies, the seismic event, once declaimed and now embraced, of the storming of the Capitol. What does the GOP want? A kingdom of Christ on earth, ruled by his self-anointed elect. In practice, to impose a nationally quite unpopular set of principles, mainly nakedly theocratic, and to seal them into unthwartable and uncontravenable law, to purge the nation of undesirables, immigrants, LGBTQ people, Muslims, feminists, and even the knowledge of undesirables, to rule uncontested and utterly dominate those they perceive to be as inferiors. The chief example of such hypocrisy at the moment is the dual and fulsome embrace by Republicans, from elected officials to the rank and file, of simultaneous and apparently contradictory notions of bodies, choice, and privacy. When it comes to vaccination, the individual is sacrosanct. When it comes to pregnancy or the termination of it, private medical choices are criminal acts. Quote, inconsistency has become the hallmark of a party that flips its principles like flapjacks whenever they conflict with perceived political advantage, unquote, says an acid editorial in the Boston Globe. Quote, hypocrisy will continue until the voters decide they have had enough, adds the West Central Tribune. But hypocrisy is a strange charge. The allegation of it demands shame and introspection, a desire to straighten one's principles out until they are truthful. It is meant to sting, but in order for such a claim to have weight and be internalized, the opinions of the accusers must matter to the accused. And that is not the case when, thinly veiled under grandiose moral pronouncement, the will to rule without opposition and to crush all those in the way is what rules. When you desire such a regime, all objections can be made without the mewling, insignificant complaint. If control is the aim and the subjugation of women is the goal, in this last Supreme Court case in particular, it simply does not matter if there is a torsion of principle or double standard or a flaw that can be highlighted. The more errant the hypocrisy, the more brazen the contradiction, the stronger the party that continues to advocate those policies grows, having been stripped of shame on the grounds that those who would seek to invoke it are bereft of worth. Any flaw is null and void because the people pointing it out mean nothing. Boom. Right on the nose, if you ask me. Right on the nose. So she basically, I think, so there, that same kind of frustration with this is hypocrisy, but calling it as the will to power. And I've been saying this on our show for quite some time now. It's like that's what they care about. They care about power. Power is the ethical center for the right. Right? Not moral power, just power to enact a will. And what that will is, it's a white supremacist patriarchal rule. That's it. Margaret Atwood's, was, she did the best thing that you could do was science fiction, right? With The Handmaid's Tale. She basically laid out the trajectory and said, this is the logical conclusion of a particular tendency of thought in this country. If this kernel is not addressed, this is where it ends up. And we could argue about, how extreme it could get and all that kind of stuff. But, look, she's not far off, right? We ought to receive what's getting set up here in this Mississippi Supreme Court case where, Brett Kavanaugh, the, sexual abuser himself, when he comes out and says, well, this is a little too complicated, because maybe we should just leave it up to the states, because the states know best. Right? And so play that out for yourself, right? What happens? Okay, so Mississippi says, okay, yep, no more abortion. There was an article in, I don't know what I did with that piece that I was looking. Oh, here we go. In the American Prospect today, by Felicia Kornblue. I think it was this one I was reading, which was, or maybe no. Actually, this was also from the American Prospect, but it was the interview with I think the district attorney, the Attorney General of Michigan, where she was saying that, look, you already see you're gonna have you're gonna set up this infrastructure that's going to allow to help support women for escaping, right, in order to have abortions, right? And she also points out, it's like, look, it's not like once you destroy this, right, any kind of rights to privacies, maybe you're kind of, same-sex marriage, for example, can be gone. And you have people fleeing these states, right? What happens in The Handmaid's Tale, right? You have this split, right? You have the kind of like the holy nation, right? Which is all about the kind of controlling of women's bodies and white supremacy and patriarchy. That's what fascism's all about, folks, right? And this is what this is. Let's be clear. So, what do I do with this other piece? So that's been the kind of thing that's been on my mind. And when Talia Lavin was put that in her piece, what did I do with that? Here we go. I don't know why I lost this one version of what I had here. Well, I guess I'll deal with this one. That's just strange. When she had that piece, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I've been talking about. This is exactly the kind of thing. Obviously she puts it a heck of a lot better than I ever could. But that's really, oh, here it is. But that's really key. That's really key. So, all right. So what I want to do is like, there's this piece that I talked a little bit about on Friday by Rebecca Traister. And I mean, obviously you're not going to read all of it. But this is another one of these pieces that's, I think kind of critical to check out. So this is Betrayal of Roe by Rebecca Traister. Oh, you know what? Every time when I do this, people ask me for links. So let me just go ahead and I'm going to drop in the link to Talia Lavin's piece. This is from her her blog, or this is from her. I guess on her now it's her blog. We'll say blog, The Sword and the Sandwich. There's the link to it. Oh, that's a big link. Oh, hold on, I gotta make it a small link. It was too big. It wasn't. I didn't realize that it was going to do that. Okay, here you go. And that's the link to that one particular article. I'll put in right now before I get into Rebecca Traister's piece, the link to her article too as well, called The Betrayal of Roe. Here we go. Rebecca Traister. There you go. That's from New York Mag. So what she does is kind of levels out this particular kind of critique. And where we go. So instead of like trying to describe her too much, let me just go ahead and let her speak. Or I'll read her words, I should say. So this is it. In the aftermath of the Supreme Court's oral arguments this week on the fate of Roe v. Wade, in which a phalanx of right-wing justices made plain their disdain for the law, has been a festival of finger-pointing and recrimination by those who were startled to have woken up in a world in which it looks very much like the right to legal abortion care will soon cease to exist at the federal level. And she says she understands that impulse, moves on. But this impulse is itself short-sighted and self-serving, in that it allows us to evade the far more suffocating and incriminating reality that we got to this terrifying place not just by some wrong turn made recently by one wrong person we don't like, but by a decades-long systemic failures. The biggest and most damning of these is the failure to counter a regressive movement's project to ensure minority rule and thus dismantle the rights and protections won by activists who labored over generations to gain them, abortion rights very much included. That failure in turn reflects a deeper one, an unwillingness to take the full humanity of women, of pregnant people, of black and brown and poor people seriously. Let me just read that one part. The biggest and most damning of these is the failure to counter a regressive movement's project to ensure minority rule and thus dismantle the rights and protections won by activists who labored over generations to gain them. If there's a theme about what Raging Chicken is about, that's it. And we were born in the wake of the Tea Party victories of 2010. When we saw what was happening in Wisconsin, where labor rights were being stripped away in Wisconsin. And then we saw this right-wing playbook start to roll out across the country in very short succession. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Idaho, right? There was a playbook that was put together. And then shortly after it rolled out, we found, thanks to the kind of the fantastic folks at the, I'm always forgetting their name lately. I don't know, the Media Institute, I'm sorry, in Wisconsin. Thanks to their work called ALEC Exposed. This was the American Legislative Exchange Council and the Koch brothers, right? We learned about them. And then all this amazing reporting came out about the Koch brothers, about this decades long of dark money, Dark Money, that book, Jane Mayer's book, laying out this like decades long attack, exactly what Rebecca Traister says here. The attack on majority rule, an attempt to ensure minority rule. Which, even though the libertarian Koch brothers always had this kind of like, libertarian economic stuff in here, there was always the kind of like patriarchal white supremacist kind of structure built into that in such a way they didn't need to say it. They were doing that alongside the religious right and all this other stuff. This has been going on. So that's what she says. Back to her. The overturn of Roe will not be about one failed electoral campaign or badly timed Supreme Court death or failure to retire. Though, as with any historical cataclysm, its timing and shape will have been determined by those factors, sure. But Roe, like the Voting Rights Act that was gutted in 2013, and the labor and climate and anti-corporate and gay rights protection that have been and will continue to be rolled back, it would not have been made vulnerable to these quirks of timing and personality had it ever had the kind of institutional, ideological, intellectual, and emotional muscle behind it that it deserved. Its loss will reflect years of inattention from those entrusted with its guardianship. By definition, the people nearest to the top of our power structures, people who advertise themselves as invested in the rights and protections of people of color, to the bottom, yet who have repeatedly failed to prioritize those people's dignity and well-being, to even really see, much less care about, the daily lived impact of abortion prohibition. She goes into some of the history there too, but I'm like, man, I mean, I remember Rebecca Tracer going on the Chris Hayes show, All In with Chris Hayes. This was back when Ruth Bader Ginsburg had just died, right? I mean, and it was clear that Donald Trump was going to be able to appoint yet another Supreme Court justice that was effectively, and just in one of the worst, just kind of disgusting moves, immediately replace RBG with somebody who's going to overturn her life's work, basically. I mean, just like incredible. But and as is the case, I mean, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. I mean, at the time, everybody was faced with that, right? She's talking about the peculiarities, and there was a lot, even on this show. Let's be clear, right? I mean, remember despairing that that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had not retired before the election, but you, me, everybody, all the pollsters, whatever, everyone thought that without a handful of people thought otherwise. But, most people thought Hillary Clinton was a sure win. We never get someone like Trump. And, well, here we are. Those are those peculiarities. But her point when she was on that show, which was on Chris Hayes, she's like, look, we can despair all we can, but the only reason we're despairing right now is because we've abandoned the work that activists had built it took them generations to build. And the Democratic Party walked away from it. Liberals walked away from it. Yes, said the right things, but refused to fight. And gradually allowed Roe to be chipped away. And not just Roe, as she points out. Labor rights, democratic rights, voting rights. The right to marry who you will is now getting chipped away again. Right? She goes on a little bit further and she talks about the Hyde Amendment. Well, I'll read this part. So it says, the Democratic Party, including its presidents over the decades, has not taken seriously enough the threat to abortion rights. It's not that these politicians didn't officially support the correct thing, right? So what they said were words, right? What they would support. Like Barack Obama opposed the Hyde Amendment, right? That restriction. But he also described the, quote, tradition in this town historically of not financing abortions as part of government-funded health care, unquote. He bought that argument. He said that out loud. The tradition. Instead of saying, no, bad tradition, he said, nope, we're just going to. Okay? And again, this is not about Barack Obama any more than, this is her again, this is Rebecca Traister again. This is not about Barack Obama any more than it is about Hillary Clinton, who offered one of the most powerful public explications of abortion as healthcare of any Democrat during her debate against Donald Trump. I remember that. It was amazing, right? But, and, in italics, and who is rumored to have devised the regressive, quote, safe, legal, and rare framework in the 1990s that cast abortion as a regrettably necessary evil, not a cornerstone of comprehensive health care. Right? Or is it about Bernie Sanders, she writes, who has remained a staunch opponent of the Hyde Amendment or any abortion restriction throughout his entire career, and has argued that voters could get past their differences on gun and abortion and find common economic ground as if abortion is not itself an economic issue. Right? She's right through the political spectrum. He's on the Democratic side of things. We know where the Republicans stand, right? So she writes, it's about a Democratic Party that has, before and since Roe, included lots of politicians who believe in abortion rights and access, but simply do not prioritize it, who have argued that their party should be more and not less open to those who actively oppose abortion if they are otherwise progressive on economic issues, as if those stances are compatible. They are not. Democratic leadership chose not to fight vocally the Supreme Court nomination of Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, or Amy Coney Barrett as being an assault on legal abortion, even though the president who nominated them had directly promised anti-abortion groups, quote, another 2 or perhaps 3 justices, unquote, who would, quote, automatically, in my opinion, overturn Roe. Right? You remember that? We're going to give them a fair hearing. We're going to look at their legal decisions, defending trying to kind of perform the institution in the face of another party who is driven by the will to power only. They have if Donald Trump was not, we heard, how many times did you hear Donald Trump is an existential threat to the democracy? But they would say, we need a strong Republican Party. No, the Republican Party has become that existential threat. It's not just one person. And you've got a party that's supposedly standing up for the rest of us, who's giving, well, you got to give a chance. Well, they're not that bad. Well, we have to do things, this kind of thing. They'll come around. No. They're standing by and enabling them. They're watching and providing some degree of cover for the assault on women's health care, a right to abortion, the right to a living wage, the right to vote, the right to democracy. Right? She continues, this was right out there for everyone on the broadly defined left to see, hear, and fight tooth and nail against. But again and again, those at the top of the party signaled that it was not a fight worth having and have remained quiet, even as Republicans cast the ones who were fighting it as deranged. During Kavanaugh's confirmation hearings, Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse lectured on how there had been, quote, been screaming protesters saying women are going to die at every hearing for decades. Well, Sasse was correct. There have been those protesters, and they have been treated as hysterics, not just by Sasse himself, but by the party that should have been letting their intensity guide them. Make no mistake, Traister writes, Make no mistake, those protesters have been correct for all the years and all the hearings. Yet Democrats have permitted an inaccurate, dishonest right-wing framework. The notion that abortion is some hot-button issue on which the country is sharply divided, when in fact, the protection of the right to legal abortion is one of the most popular planks in a Democratic platform, even in red states, to keep them from making political fights about abortion. I'm sure that the argument behind this can be backed up by some pollster or numbers guy or consultant, but the big unspoken reason is that most politicians, the majority of whom remain white men and many of the rest wealthy white women who themselves will never know inaccessibility of healthcare, find abortion icky and distasteful because they find the bodies and lives and needs of people who need abortions icky and distasteful. This is such a freaking dead-on and scathing assessment of what's going on. I'm going to skip a little bit and read this one part. She's like, look, it's going to need a movement. Will there be protests? Will there be marches? Yeah, of course. Right, she says, but will that movement produce satisfying results in many of our lifetimes? I am afraid not, because the failure to understand or reckon with that drive for liberation, and more, the failure to understand or reckon with the drive to squelch it, has now left millions of people fucked for a very long time. The finger pointing that we're going to do for days and weeks and months and years is another iteration of our failures to recognize what's actually in front of us. Because with easy demonization comes the fantasy of easy salvation. That's a freaking brilliant line. Because with easy demonization comes the fantasy of easy salvation. If one terrible person broke it, surely one other wonderful person can fix it. But that's not true. There is no one politician, no one activist, no single protest or perfect approach to activism that will offer any quick remedy here. Instead, the future is messy and sad and difficult and extremely bleak. If the Supreme Court does indeed strike down Roe, many of us will not live to see its reverse. These rights were decades in the winning, decades in the undoing, and will again be decades in the remaking. I do not mean despair or accepting defeat, which would be yet another instance of giving in to short-term comfort and ease. It's incumbent upon us not to check out, not to give up, as it will be tempted to do on most days, to not evade responsibility by shifting the blame to others, but instead to face the future with respect owed to our forebearers and a crystal clear vision of who is going to be suffering right now in the coming years. She goes on a little bit more. I'm telling you, this is like, I remember when I listened and I watched the hearings on that Wednesday, and I kept on saying, I can't remember, I don't know how many people I said this to at the time, but I'm just like, has Rebecca Tracer written anything yet? Right? I was just like, I really need to hear her words for. It was kind of like a check, you know. I mean, it's like I sometimes worry that, that I kind of lose that point of connection, right? That because, paying such close attention to this and so on and things like this, and so, am I seeing this as a bigger issue than it is? Not that this was clear. I mean, the Supreme Court hearing was clear, but I mean, like, are we really headed down this horrible path, right? Is this really, is it just my, constitutional whatever drive toward seeking out problems or something? You know what I mean? I mean, it's like that self-questioning that always goes on, that you always have, and Rebecca Tracer has been one of those people that is just basically, remind me, dude, no, you're not. This is real. and I want to add just one other. I'm not going to spend as much time with this, and because I knew this would happen. I was just concerned that I was trying to pack too much in tonight. But I just finished a book by yet another amazing woman, Jay McAlevey. The book is called A Collective Bargain, and it was an incredibly hopeful book, and it seemed to like pair extraordinarily well with Rebecca Traister's assessment. And I if I really sat down to think about it enough, I could probably draw you a really more direct line about why that is the case. But what McAlevey, I guess it's this really. I mean, it's what Rebecca Traister just kind of ends on there, right? This is kind of in our hands, right? And it's going to take a remaking. With Jane McAlevey, right? Jane McAlevey is always, I mean, for those of you who don't know who she is, she's like just an amazing union organizer. I mean, she worked with SEIU 1199 for years. She's become, she's written several books on union organizing. The No Shortcuts is a book, literally, when she published No Shortcuts, which was basically about doing union organizing and kind of organizing for power. I bought several copies of them. We were leading up to the strike, ABSCOF strike, and I handed them out to people on the organizing committee because I was like, "This is like," for me, it was like a gift that Jay McAlevey wrote this book and just kind of like got my own head straight in terms of thinking about organizing and what it would entail, the kind of work that was necessary to do this. That we were having lots of issues at the time with our state leadership, who really wanted to kind of keep this as a much more control the communications, control how the organization take place, try to keep everybody happy, right? And we were Jay McAlevey says in kind of a collective bargain, she basically said, look, the job of a union, the power of a union comes in its ability to disrupt and create a crisis for the employer. That's it. A union without a credible strike threat is a union that does not have power, period. That is everything that, I mean, if I had to boil her stuff down to in a nut, that's it. And again, and what Jay McAlevey is talking about, she has this thing. All right, this is a little bit off what I want to say, but it's just amazing. If you go to her website, she's got a bunch of some of the pictures and different consultants. They have negotiations committee meetings, right? I mean, like negotiating sessions with the opposition. You have your negotiating team, and there's negotiating sessions where there's 100 other workers in the room. She is insistent that negotiation should be open and that any worker who is going to be covered by that contract has the right, any union member has the right to be at that table too. And if you've spent any time within unions, you know that is kind of like, that freaks some people out. Certainly freaks our union leadership out. The idea that you have everyone at the table, holy crap. And not just there to witness, but there to even participate. And they've been part of the process from the get-go because the contract has gone from the ground up, not from the top down. Right? That's what she's talking about. What's really interesting about this book, The Collective Bargain, A Collective Bargain, is that she got this one chapter. Let me see. Workers can still win big, right? And she goes through and she basically does like, I said to my friend Mike, I said, I wish I had this book years ago, right? When I was first getting involved with union stuff, it's like, it starts really with basics. Like, what is a union? Right. And this is not the first thing she says in the book, but this, and she's basically said, look, what is it? This is what District 1199, SEIU, everyone had to memorize this. Right. And they had to know this by heart. And it said, what is it? What is a union? A collective effort by all employees who work for an employer to stop the boss from doing what you don't want him to do, discharge, unfair layoff, promotion, speed up, etc. To make the boss do what you want him to do, more pay, vacations, holidays, health coverage, pensions, etc. And to be used in any other way the members see fit. That's it. It's real simple. That's it. That's what a union is. Right? And I'm like, yes. And she says, look, you got to think about, union. You got to think about a union is basically like, a union is basically a mechanism, right? There's nothing that makes it inherently good or nothing that makes it inherently bad. Although its internal rules and how it functions can influence its effectiveness, right? Just like everything, because unions are made up of people and the structures reflect stability. So you're going to have bad people out there sometime. And sometimes you're going to build structures that make it less effective, that make it disconnected from workers. That's what all business unionism is all about. Where you have a group of experts that kind of dictate things and they give messages. Communication is pretty much one way, right? It's not an organizing model where you recognize your power is not in your in the communication skills and negotiation skills of the leadership, but actually in the power of the strike readiness of its workers. Right? And then she also says, like, look, if the governance systems encourage participation by the best and the most diverse workers, the union will reflect the best and most diverse workers' values. Conversely, if the organization is a do-nothing union, just like elected politicians, it will reflect the least good values among the workforce, just like elected politicians and their constituents. Unions often differ based on the culture of the employer and the type of workforce, no different from states which differ based upon the types of people that make up its population. Unions then are far from monolithic. And she says, quote, there is significant variation among the different branches of the same union. And she goes into that a little bit. I meant to say, or is this one part I wanted to say? Oh, anyways, so that's what kind of, she goes into that kind of stuff. And it kind of lays through some of that stuff. And that whole idea about, look, a union that doesn't do good, right, is a do-nothing union. It will reflect the values of those folks that, are going to make it less effective. People who like to be around managers, right, like to kind of are more interested in their own personal status than they are in the building power of the workforce, that worry about being uncomfortable when talking to their bosses. A union that's afraid of conflict, right, is a union that will fail, in my view. So one of the other things that she says in this book that is, most important that I want to kind of close on, she's like, she does a series of case studies in here. One of them, which is the PASNAP nurses from Philadelphia, right? Just the whole chapter on the Nurses Organizing Project. You got to read this book. It's freaking amazing, and read that stuff from about the PASNAP stuff. It's just absolutely incredible, right? She also talks about teachers organizing in West Virginia. I mean, it's just a super, super book. But she makes this point, right, in A Collective Bargain. And here it is, quote, despite the weakened state of most unions, workers today who are either forming new ones or reforming older ones point us in the direction of how to solve the crisis engulfing our society and our politics. In the midterm elections in 2018, dubbed the Year of the Woman, the misogyny oozing from the White House was somewhat rebuked at the polls. Yet the year before, working women scored a series of thoroughly impressive wins just after Donald Trump lost the popular vote, but eked out a win from the Electoral College. Many of those victories received far less media attention. And as in the midterm elections, men contributed to these wins, certainly, but the central characters were women. Often women of color who waged tireless campaigns of which the outcomes would have drastic consequences. And chapter 1, she's talking about here, discusses 3 such examples of women big. The arena for these battles was the workplace, in the most female sectors of the economy, such as healthcare, education, and hospitality, but also in the tech sector, where sexual harassment and gender pay gaps served as a stark reminder that despite the tech elite's rhetoric of building a new society, nothing much has changed, unless you count the creation of a new generation of Silicon Valley billionaires as progress. Women worker-led policy changes included people wresting control of their schedules away from tone-deaf managers, most of whom had never had to pick up their kids at the bus stop, securing fair and meaningful pay raises, achieving bold new safeguards from sexual predators, and ending racism and other discriminatory practices in their salary structure. The mechanism for securing these victories was the collective bargaining process, and each involved strikes, the key leveraging mechanisms of unions. And this is the key point. Strikes are uniquely powerful under the capitalist system because employers need one thing and one thing only from workers: to show up and make the employer money. When it comes to forcing the top executives to rethink their pay, benefits, or other policies, there's no form of regulation more powerful than a serious strike. The strikes that work the best and win the most are the ones in which at least 90% of all the workers walk out, having first forged unity among themselves and with their broader community. To gain the trust and support of those whose lives may be affected, smart unions work diligently to erase the lines separating the workplace from society. The methods organizers use to achieve these kinds of all-out strikes require the discipline and focus of devoting almost all of their time and effort to reaching out to workers who don't initially agree, or who even may think that they are opposed to the strike, if not the entire idea of the union. This commitment to consensus building is exactly what's needed to save democracy. To win big, we have to follow the methods of spending very little time engaging with people who already agree, and devote most of our time to the harder work of helping people who do not agree come to understand who is really to blame for the pain in their lives. Pulling off a big, successful strike means talking to everyone, working through hard conversations over and over until everyone agrees. All-out strikes then produce something desperately needed today: clarity about the two sides of any issue. Big strikes are political education bigly. And that was, I think, where I put those things together, Rebecca Traister and Jay McAlevey. That idea that the shame politics of calling people out for hypocrisy, worrying about the legitimacy of our things, was going to get us nowhere. Morality politics, not going to function, not going to work, not going to be effective. What Rebecca Traister points us to is the fact that, look, this took generations to win. And yes, a lot of the organizing around Roe v. Wade and things like this, yes, that took place not in unions, but unions were also a big part of that. And yes, they were contradictory, and at times they were regressive, and they were kind, all that kind of stuff, right? Just as feminist movement and women's movement has been fraught with these kind of intersectionalities that kind of have had to kind of have sometimes set the movements back and have sometimes put them forward. But that idea of organizing 90%, the ability to say, no, we will not do it. And, I would take it one step further. I tend to agree with McAlevey that, the workplace is the place where we can negotiate concretely for power, as long as we are strike ready, as long as we have a workforce that is prepared for, is trained for, and is organized for a strike. If a union is not investing significant amount of resources in training its members for a strike, that union is ceding its effectiveness to the boss. Our power, as Rick Smith has always said, is that ability to put our hands in our pockets and say no. And I would extend that beyond the workplace. That has been the calling card of any social movement worth its weight. Women who have refused to keep the patriarchy churning and said no. Demanded their rights and fought for them. Said business as usual will not continue. We are going to put an end to that. That is true of the civil rights movement. We will no longer say yes. We will no longer allow the system to continue to churn our lives away We will say no. And it's that little bit of irony, right? The saying of no. The refusal to work for an exploitative employer. An employer who basically doesn't think that, I don't know, paid parental leave is actually, just a thing that everybody should have. We say, yes, it is something, everyone. And if they say no, we stick our hands in our pocket and we say, well, good luck. Good luck teaching your students. Good luck making your widget. Good luck selling your books. Good luck driving your delivery vans. Good luck with that. And it's uncomfortable. It's always uncomfortable. This is what Antonio Gramsci, right? This is what Gramsci called hegemony, right? The consent of the masses. Even if it's begrudging consent, doesn't matter. As long as we're willing to continue to punch the card and go in. As long as we're willing to kind of say, well, it sucks, there's no alternative. As long as we're to throw up our hands and think that this is the best that we can do, that's consent in political terms. Saying no is an affirmation to the many yeses, right? Saying no, I will not allow myself to be part of this exploitation. And not just me as an individual. That's the key thing, right? It's not just this is not just about me as an individual and what I do. It's what we do. Because as Jane McAlevey and everyone else that we talked about here tonight, Jane McAlevey will say, right? Yeah, and I've talked about this on the show before, right? You have one of us who thinks we're the kind of moral high point, right? And we decide by ourselves to show that we will not stand for this. And individually, we'll say no. Well, we get fired. Right? Good luck. Hope your morality's intact, buddy. Good for you. Right? Aren't you special? Right? It's the same thing you see all the kind of there's that one aspect of call out culture, right? Where, there's an aspect of call out culture where you're calling out really bad behavior that needs to stop and people organize together and make to call that out and say this needs to end, and then it ends, right? There's a different kind of call out culture which is just about kind of someone demonstrating, right? It's the virtual signaling thing, right? And the left and the right do it both, right? The whole idea I'm going to kind of show you that I'm the kind of more moral human being by what I'm going to say right now. But that's going to be the end of my participation in kind of this, struggle, whatever. But that hard work, and look, I read Rebecca Traister and I read Jane McAlevey's book, and am I reading this stuff, and I'm really thinking hard about my own participation. I'm really thinking hard about, okay, how do I make this possible? How do I prioritize this kind of organizing and being part of that solution? On a personal note, and I think that's come from me, is I felt and I've said this on the show before, so this is not going to be a revelation to too many people, but it's I believed deeply in higher education, right? I believe deeply in that process of engaging real ideas, right? And thinking through things and thinking about possibilities and democracy. And I believe that higher education was one of the key places to do this. And, I still do, abstractly, but just on a personal level, and there's a lot of complicated reasons for this that, I'm not going to kind of drag all that stuff through the mud, but is that, I had slowly over time, I had that, passion, snuffed out of me. Right. I felt and I still feel this way to a large degree, but, that the things that I cared about most and what I did in terms of my job were just, and my union work, were just kind of taken. And it felt I put in all this work, and I really did. I really had a belief that if you did work over time, and And I work with other people who did the same thing, and you try to build, and you try to build something up, and you think that's going to pay off, right? And sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't, right? Doesn't work out. But other times it feels, at least for me, getting left in a place where I don't know. I don't even know how to put it, but in a certain like place of just kind of like hopelessness is not even the right word. It's just kind of like, it just feels like, okay, you guys won. I mean, the powers that be, you win. I've got nothing left. And I think I've finally kind of taken a turn out of that space over this, and ironically, that's something the pandemic did for me personally, is to kind of reset a little bit of my, my relationship to my job and my work and things like this. And I think it's, and it's, panning out in a kind of a much more positive way now, certainly, in terms of like where I'm focused on. And it's also brought me back to, like I say, with Jay McAlee, Rebecca Traister and stuff like this, is like, really, this is what matters. And sometimes the wins can be painful. The losses can be painful, but the wins are necessary. And, building, it's a cliche, but building things is always a lot harder and takes more time than tearing things down. And you hope you get to the point where you get to see, the finished building, right, that you're working on. But I think a lot of times we end up, we lay some bricks. We paint a wall. We plant a garden, right? And we have that vision that where we're going, right? Where we want to go, where we hope to go. And that's what keeps us moving, right? And the idea that, we look for those places where we can find spaces to treat each other in the way that gives us an inkling of what that future could look like, and finding those spaces of kindness and joy and love and stuff are hard, right? So, but that's that. Anyways, I've taken y'all way longer than I was planning on for the evening. Thank y'all for tuning in. And I know I did a lot of talking tonight, but there's kind of a lot on my mind, and thank you for putting up with me. Want to remind you that next week we are going to be here with Dina Lagerman. Dina Lagerman is a former candidate for Central Buck School District School Board. And who was on the receiving end of a lot of, dark money, Paul Martino's dumping all this kind of cash into that school district. So we'll talk a little about her. We'll talk about her amazing article called Central Bucks is Not Okay. That'll be on December 13th at 7 p.m. And then 1 week later, December 20th, that Christmas week, as it were, we will have Christopher Rodke on the show, and we're going to talk about religion and politics and kind of this kind of rise of the right wing, and also his new candidacy. He'll be running for office in his district over in the kind of the York area, and so we got a couple of real good shows that will kind of take us up to that. And my guess is that that may be the last Out to Coop Live of 2021 on the 20th, because the following week is the 27th. We may or may not do a show, most likely not. It might be away during that show, and then be the new year. So coming right up on 2022 real quick. So anyways, everybody, listen, I'm thinking about you, and I'm appreciating all that you've done to help support the show, that all that you're doing out there to organize in the communities. As we kind of come out of this slowly, hopefully come out of this pandemic, which is, has taken such a toll on so many of us, that we're going to be able to do some more of this in person hopefully soon, because I would freaking love to hang out with some folks that I know only through the work we do here at Raging Chicken. So thank you. Anyways, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. I appreciate all the work that everybody's doing out there, and I really look forward to being here every week. So we'll see you next week. We'll see you later this week. We're out the coop. See ya!
I'll fly